Welcome to L.V History. Before we begin our immersion, please save this video so you can drift along with us to the very end. Subscribe and leave a like. This helps us weave new worlds for you. And now, get comfortable, relax, and sweet dreams. Franz Kafka. In the Penal Colony. "It's a remarkable apparatus," said the officer to the traveler, and he surveyed with a gaze of what seemed a certain admiration the apparatus that was nevertheless thoroughly familiar to him. The traveler appeared to have accepted the invitation only out of politeness. The commandant had asked him to attend the execution of a soldier condemned for disobedience and insulting a superior officer. Nor was interest in this execution apparently very great even in the penal colony. At least here, in this deep, sandy little valley closed in on all sides by bare slopes, there were present, apart from the officer and the traveler, only the condemned man, a dull-witted, wide-mouthed creature with bedraggled hair and face, and the soldier who held the heavy chain into which smaller chains ran from the condemned man's ankles, wrists, and neck, chains that were also linked to one another by connecting chains. For that matter, the condemned man looked so doggishly submissive that it seemed one might let him run free over the slopes and would only have to whistle when the execution was due to begin for him to come. The traveler had little feeling for the apparatus and walked back and forth behind the condemned man with almost visible indifference while the officer attended to the final preparations, now crawling under the apparatus, which was sunk deep into the ground, now climbing a ladder to inspect the upper parts. These were tasks that one might really have left to a mechanic, yet the officer carried them out with great zeal, whether because he was a particularly devoted admirer of this apparatus or because for other reasons the work could not be entrusted to anyone else. "All ready now," he finally called, and climbed down the ladder. He was extraordinarily exhausted, breathed with his mouth wide open, and had thrust two delicate ladies' handkerchiefs under the collar of his uniform. "These uniforms are really too heavy for the tropics," said the traveler, instead of inquiring about the apparatus as the officer had expected. "Of course," said the officer, washing his oil and grease-stained hands in a bucket of water that stood ready, "but they mean home. We don't want to lose our home. But now take a look at this apparatus," he added at once, drying his hands with a towel while pointing to the apparatus. Up to now some manual work was still required, but from now on the apparatus works entirely on its own. The traveler nodded and followed the officer. The latter sought to secure himself against all contingencies and said, "Interruptions do occur, of course. I hope none will occur today, but one must reckon with them. The apparatus is supposed to run for 12 hours without interruption. But even if interruptions do occur, they are only very minor ones, and they will be remedied at once. Won't you sit down?" he asked finally, pulled one of the many cane chairs out of a pile, and offered it to the traveler. The latter could not refuse. He was now sitting at the edge of a pit, into which he cast a fleeting glance. It was not very deep. On one side the excavated earth had been heaped up into a bank, on the other side stood the apparatus. "I don't know," said the officer, "whether the commandant has already explained the apparatus to you." The traveler made a vague gesture with his hand. The officer asked for nothing better, for now he could explain the apparatus himself. "This apparatus," he said, grasping a crank handle that he leaned upon, "is an invention of our former commandant. I collaborated on the very first tests and took part in all the work until its completion. The merit for the invention, however, belongs entirely to him alone. Have you heard of our former commandant? No? Well, I am not claiming too much when I say that the entire organization of the penal colony is his work. We, his friends, already knew at his death that the organization of the colony was so self-contained that his successor, even if he had 1,000 new plans in his head, would not be able to alter anything of the old arrangement for many years at least. Our prediction has also come true. The new commandant has had to recognize it. A pity you did not know the former commandant. But, the officer interrupted himself, I'm chattering, and here is his apparatus before us. It consists, as you see, of 3 parts. In the course of time, a kind of popular designation has been established for each of these parts. The lower one is called the bed, the upper one the designer, and this middle one here, the suspended one, is called the harrow. The harrow? Asked the traveler. He had not been listening with full attention. The sun was trapped too fiercely in the shadeless valley, it was hard to collect one's thoughts. All the more admirable, therefore, did the officer seem to him, in his tight, military, parade uniform weighed down with epaulets and hung with braid, explaining his cause so eagerly, and, while talking, still fussing here and there at a screw with a screwdriver. In a condition similar to the traveler's the soldier seemed to be. He had wound the condemned man's chain around both wrists, was supporting himself with one hand on his rifle, let his head hang down in his neck, and was indifferent to everything. The traveler was not surprised at this, for the officer was speaking French, and certainly neither the soldier nor the condemned man understood French. All the more striking, therefore, was the fact that the condemned man nevertheless tried to follow the officer's explanations. With a kind of sleepy persistence he directed his gaze wherever the officer pointed, and when the latter was now interrupted by a question from the traveler, he too looked at the traveler, just as the officer did. Yes, the harrow, said the officer. The name fits. The needles are arranged like the teeth of a harrow, and the whole thing is operated like a harrow, although it stays in one place and works with much greater precision. You'll understand it in a moment, by the way. The condemned man is laid here on the bed. First, that is, I will describe the apparatus and only then have the procedure carried out. You will then be able to follow it better. Also, a gear in the designer is too badly worn. It screeches badly when it's running. One can hardly understand oneself then. Spare parts are unfortunately very difficult to obtain here. So, here is the bed, as I said. It is completely covered with a layer of cotton wool. You'll learn the purpose of that presently. On this cotton wool the condemned man is laid face down, naked, of course. Here are straps for the hands, here for the feet, here for the neck, to buckle him fast. Here at the head end of the bed, where the man, as I said, first lies face down, is this small felt stump, which can easily be adjusted so that it presses right into the man's mouth. Its purpose is to prevent screaming and biting the tongue to pieces. Naturally, the man has to accept the felt, otherwise the neck strap would break his neck. That's cotton wool? Asked the traveler, and bent forward. Yes, certainly, said the officer with a smile, feel it yourself. He took the traveler's hand and led it over the bed. It's specially prepared cotton wool, that's why it looks so unrecognizable. I'll come to its purpose in a moment. The traveler was already a little won over to the apparatus. With his hand shielding his eyes from the sun, he looked up at the height of the apparatus. It was a massive construction. The bed and the designer had the same size and looked like 2 dark chests. The designer was mounted about 2 meters above the bed. The two were joined at the corners by 4 brass rods that almost radiated in the sun. Between the chests the harrow hung on a steel band. The officer had hardly noticed the traveler's earlier indifference, but he did have a sense for his interest now beginning. He therefore paused in his explanation to give the traveler time for undisturbed observation. The condemned man imitated the traveler. Since he could not put his hand over his eyes, he blinked upward with uncovered eyes. So now the man lies down, said the traveler, leaned back in the chair, and crossed his legs. Yes, said the officer, pushed his cap back a little, and passed his hand over his hot face. Now listen. Both the bed and the designer have their own electric batteries. The bed needs one for itself, the designer for the harrow. As soon as the man is strapped down, the bed is set in motion. It quivers in minute, very rapid vibrations both sideways and up and down. You will have seen similar apparatus in sanatoria, only with our bed all movements are precisely calculated. They have, after all, to be meticulously coordinated with the movements of the harrow. But it is to this harrow that the actual execution of the sentence has been entrusted. "What is the sentence, then?" asked the traveler. "You don't know that either," said the officer in amazement, and bit his lip. "Forgive me if my explanations are perhaps somewhat disorganized. I do beg your pardon." It was the commandant who used to give the explanations. The new commandant, however, has shirked this duty of honor, yet that he fails to inform such an eminent visitor. The traveler tried to wave away the honor with both hands, but the officer insisted on the expression. Such an eminent visitor, even of the form of our sentencing, is again a new feature, which he had a curse on his lips, but controlled himself and said only, "I was not informed of it, it is not my fault. In any case, I am certainly the person best able to explain our kind of sentencing, for here I have," he slapped his breast pocket, "the relevant drawings made by our former commandant." "Drawings by the commandant himself?" asked the traveler. "Did he combine everything in himself, then? Was he soldier, judge, engineer, chemist, and draftsman?" "Indeed," said the officer, nodding with a fixed, thoughtful gaze. Then he looked at his hands inspectively. They did not seem clean enough to him to touch the drawings. He therefore went to the bucket and washed them again. Then he drew out a small leather folder and said, "Our sentence does not sound severe. The commandment the condemned man has violated is inscribed on his body with the harrow. This condemned man, for instance," the officer pointed to the man, "will have inscribed on his body, 'Honor thy superiors.'" The traveler glanced briefly at the man. When the officer pointed at him, he kept his head down and seemed to be straining all his hearing to learn something. But the movements of his thickly pressed together lips showed clearly that he could not understand anything. The traveler had various questions he wanted to ask, but at the sight of the man asked only, "Does he know his sentence?" "No," said the officer, and wanted to continue at once with his explanations, but the traveler interrupted him. "He doesn't know his own sentence?" "No," said the officer again, paused for a moment as if demanding from the traveler a more detailed justification for his question, and then said, "It would be useless to proclaim it to him. He experiences it on his body." The traveler was about to fall silent when he felt the condemned man directing his gaze at him. The man seemed to be asking whether he could approve the procedure described. Therefore the traveler, who had already leaned back, bent forward again and asked, "But that he has been sentenced at all, he does know that, surely?" "No, that either," said the officer, and smiled at the traveler as if expecting some further strange revelations from him now. "No," said the traveler, wiping his forehead, "then the man doesn't know even now how his defense was received?" "He has had no opportunity to defend himself," said the officer, and looked aside as if speaking to himself and wishing not to embarrass the traveler by recounting these things self-evident to him. "But he must have had a chance to defend himself," said the traveler, and stood up from the chair. The officer realized that he was in danger of being held up for a long time in his explanation of the apparatus. He therefore went to the traveler, linked arms with him, pointed with his hand at the condemned man, who now, since attention was so plainly directed at him, stood very stiffly, the soldier also pulling on the chain, and said, "The matter stands as follows. I have been appointed judge here in the Penal Colony. In spite of my youth. For I assisted the former commandant in all penal matters too, and know the apparatus best as well. The principle on which I base my decisions is this: guilt is always beyond doubt. Other courts cannot follow this principle, for they consist of many heads and also have higher courts above them. That is not the case here, or at least was not under the former commandant. The new one has indeed already shown a desire to interfere in my court, but so far I have succeeded in fending him off, and will continue to succeed. You wanted this case explained. It is as simple as all of them. This morning a captain reported that this man, who was assigned to him as servant and sleeps in front of his door, had slept through his tour of duty. For he has the duty of rising at every stroke of the hour and saluting in front of the captain's door. Certainly not a difficult duty, and a necessary one, for he is supposed to remain fresh both for guarding and for service. Last night the captain wanted to check whether the servant was fulfilling his duty. He opened the door at the stroke of 2 and found him curled up asleep. He fetched the riding whip and struck him across the face. Instead of then standing up and begging pardon, the man seized his master by the legs, shook him, and cried, "Throw away the whip or I'll eat you up." That is the evidence. The captain came to me an hour ago. I wrote down his statement, and immediately appended the sentence. Then I had the man put in chains. All that was very simple. Had I first summoned the man and questioned him, only confusion would have resulted. He would have lied, and had I succeeded in refuting the lies, he would have replaced them with new lies, and so on. But now I have him and won't let him go again. Is everything explained now? But time is passing. The execution should already be beginning, and I am not yet finished with the explanation of the apparatus. He pressed the traveler down into the chair, went to the apparatus again, and began. As you see, the harrow corresponds to the form of a human being. Here is the harrow for the torso. Here are the harrows for the legs. For the head there is only this small spike. Is that clear to you? He leaned forward amicably toward the traveler, ready to give the most comprehensive explanations. The traveler looked at the harrow with a furrowed brow. The information about the judicial procedure had not satisfied him. Yet he had to remind himself that this was a penal colony, that special measures were necessary here, and that one had to proceed militarily down to the last detail. Besides, he placed some hope in the new commandant, who evidently intended, albeit slowly, to introduce a new procedure that could not get through to this officer's limited mind. From this train of thought the traveler asked, "Will the commandant attend the execution?" "It is not certain," said the officer, painfully embarrassed by the direct question, and his friendly expression became distorted. "That is precisely why we must hurry. I will even, much as it pains me, have to shorten my explanations. But tomorrow, when the apparatus has been cleaned again, it's getting so very dirty is its only defect, I could supply the further details. So now only the most essential. When the man lies on the bed and it is set quivering, the harrow is lowered onto the body. It adjusts itself automatically so that it touches the body only lightly with its points. Once the adjustment is completed, this steel cable immediately tightens into a rod. And now the performance begins. An outsider notices no difference among the punishments. The harrow seems to do its work uniformly. Quivering, it drives its points into the body, which itself is quivering from the bed. In order to enable everyone to check the execution of the sentence, the harrow was made of glass. Securing the needles in it caused some technical difficulties, but after many experiments it succeeded. We spared no effort, after all. And now everyone can see through the glass how the inscription takes place on the body. Won't you come closer and look at the needles? The traveler rose slowly, walked over, and bent over the harrow. You see, said the officer, there are two kinds of needles in multiple arrangements. Each long one has a short one beside it. The long one writes, "After all," and the short one sprays water to wash away the blood and keep the writing always clear. The blood water is then led here into small grooves and finally flows into this main groove, whose outlet pipe leads into the pit. The officer traced with his finger the exact path the blood water had to take. When, to make it as graphic as possible, he caught it with both hands at the mouth of the outlet pipe as if to demonstrate it, the traveler raised his head and, feeling behind him with his hand, tried to return to his chair. Then, to his horror, he saw that the condemned man too had followed the officer's invitation to inspect the construction of the harrow at close quarters. He had dragged the sleepy soldier forward a little on the chain and was also bending over the glass. One could see how he too was searching with uncertain eyes for what the two gentlemen had just been observing. How, however, since he lacked the explanation, it did not succeed for him. He bent this way and that. He kept running his eyes over the glass. The traveler wanted to push him back, for what he was doing was probably punishable. But the officer held the traveler firmly with one hand, and with the other took a clod of earth from the bank and threw it at the soldier. The latter jerked his eyes open, saw what the condemned man had dared, let his rifle fall, dug his heels into the ground, jerked the condemned man back so that he fell at once, and then looked down at him as he writhed and made his chains rattle. "Set him on his feet," shouted the officer, for he noticed that the traveler was being far too distracted by the condemned man. The traveler even bent right over the harrow, paying no attention to it, and wanted only to find out what was happening with the condemned man. "Handle him carefully," shouted the officer again. He ran around the apparatus, himself seized the condemned man under the armpits, and, with the help of the soldier, set him on his feet, which often slipped. "Now I know all about it," said the traveler as the officer returned to him. "Except the most important part," said the latter, seized the traveler by the arm, and pointed upward. "Therein the designer is the gearwork that determines the movement of the harrow, and this gearwork is arranged according to the drawing on which the sentence is based. I still use the drawings of the former commandant. Here they are." He drew some sheets from the leather folder, "but I'm sorry I can't let you handle them. They are my most precious possession. Sit down, I'll show them to you from this distance, then you'll be able to see everything well." He showed the first sheet. The traveler would gladly have said something appreciative, but he saw only labyrinthine lines crossing and recrossing one another, which covered the paper so thickly that one could recognize the blank spaces between them only with difficulty. "Read it," said the officer. "I can't," said the traveler. "But it's clear," said the officer. "It's very artful," said the traveler evasively, "but I can't decipher it." "Yes," said the officer, laughed, and put the folder away again. "It's not calligraphy for schoolchildren. One has to read it for a long time. Eventually you too would certainly recognize it. Of course it can't be a simple script, after all, it's not supposed to kill immediately, but only on average over a period of 12 hours. The turning point is calculated for the 6th hour. So there must be very many ornaments surrounding the actual script. The real script only runs around the body in a narrow belt. The rest of the body is intended for ornamentation. Can you now appreciate the work of the harrow and of the entire apparatus? Just watch." He leapt up the ladder, turned a wheel, called down, "Attention, withdraw to the side," and everything started moving. If the wheel had not screeched, it would have been magnificent. As if surprised by this troublesome wheel, the officer shook his fist at it, then spread his arms in apology to the traveler and quickly climbed down to observe the operation of the apparatus from below. Something was still not quite right, something only he noticed. He climbed up again, reached with both hands into the interior of the designer, then, to get down faster, slid down one of the poles instead of using the ladder, and now, to make himself understood in the noise, shouted with utmost exertion into the traveler's ear. Do you grasp the process? The harrow begins to write. When it has finished the first draft of the script on the man's back, the layer of cotton wool rolls and slowly turns the body onto its side to give the harrow new space. Meanwhile, the place is written on raw lye on the cotton wool, which, because of its special preparation, immediately stanches the bleeding and prepares for a further deepening of the script. Then these teeth here at the edge of the harrow tear the cotton wool from the wounds as the body is turned further, throw it into the pit, and the harrow has more work to do. Thus it writes ever deeper for 12 hours. The first 6 hours the condemned man lives almost as before, he only suffers pain. After 2 hours the felt is removed, for the man no longer has strength to scream. Here into this electrically heated basin at the head end warm rice pap is placed, from which the man, if he wants, can take whatever his tongue can reach. No one misses the opportunity. I don't know of any, and my experience is extensive. Only around the 6th hour does he lose pleasure in eating. I usually kneel down here then and observe the phenomenon. The man rarely swallows the last bite, he only turns it around in his mouth and spits it into the pit. I have to duck then, or it would land in my face. How quiet the man becomes around the 6th hour, though. Understanding dawns on the dullest. It begins around the eyes. From there it spreads out. A sight that could tempt one to lay oneself down under the harrow too. Nothing more happens, the man only begins to decipher the script, he purses his mouth as if he were listening. You have seen, it is not easy to decipher the script with one's eyes, but our man deciphers it with his wounds. It is a lot of work, to be sure, he needs 6 hours to complete it. Then the harrow impales him completely and throws him into the pit, where he splashes down onto the blood water and the cotton wool. Then judgment is over, and we, I and the soldier, bury him. The traveler had inclined his ear to the officer and, with hands in his coat pockets, watched the machine at work. The condemned man watched too, but without understanding. He bent forward a little and followed the swaying needles when the soldier, at a sign from the officer, cut through the man's shirt and trousers from behind with a knife so that they fell away from him. He tried to catch the falling things to cover his nakedness, but the soldier lifted him up and shook the last scraps off him. The officer stopped the machine, and in the silence that now ensued the condemned man was laid under the harrow. The chains were removed, and instead the straps fastened. In the first moment it seemed almost a relief for the condemned man. And now the harrow sank a little lower still, for he was a thin man. When the points touched him, a shudder ran over his skin. While the soldier was busy with his right hand, he stretched out his left, not knowing where, but it was the direction where the traveler stood. The officer kept looking sideways at the traveler, as if seeking to read from his face the impression the execution, which he had now at least superficially explained to him, was making on him. The strap meant for the wrist tore, probably the soldier had pulled it too tight. The officer was supposed to help, the soldier showed him the torn piece of strap. So the officer went over to him too and said, with his face turned toward the traveler, "The machine is very complex, something has to tear or break here and there, but one must not let that mislead one in one's overall judgment. For the strap, by the way, a replacement is immediately at hand. I will use a chain. The delicacy of the vibration will of course be impaired for the right arm thereby." And while he fastened the chains, he still said, "The means for maintaining the machine are now very limited. Under the former commandant a fund accessible only to me was set aside solely for this purpose. There was a storehouse here in which all possible replacement parts were kept. I confess I almost squandered them, I mean formerly, not now, as the new commandant claims, for whom everything serves only as a pretext to combat the old institutions. Now he has the machine fund under his own administration, and if I send for a new strap, the torn one is demanded as proof, the new one arrives only after 10 days, and is then of inferior quality and not much use. But how I am supposed to operate the machine in the meantime without a strap? No one cares about that. The traveler reflected, it is always questionable to intervene decisively in foreign affairs. He was neither a citizen of the penal colony nor a citizen of the state to which it belonged. If he wanted to condemn or even hinder this execution, people could say to him, "You are a foreigner, keep quiet." To that he would have nothing to reply, only be able to add that in this case he did not understand himself, for he traveled only with the intention of seeing and by no means, say, of altering foreign judicial systems. But here the circumstances were indeed very tempting. The injustice of the procedure and the inhumanity of the execution were beyond doubt. No one could assume any self-interest on the traveler's part, for the condemned man was a stranger to him, not a countryman and not a person at all inviting sympathy. The traveler himself had recommendations from high quarters, had been received here with great courtesy, and the fact that he had been invited to this execution even seemed to suggest that his judgment on this court was desired. This was, however, all the more likely since the commandant, as he had now heard only too clearly, was no supporter of this procedure and behaved toward the officer in an almost hostile manner. At that moment the traveler heard a cry of rage from the officer. He had just, not without difficulty, pushed the felt stump into the condemned man's mouth when the latter, in an irresistible fit of nausea, closed his eyes and vomited. Hastily the officer yanked him up from the stump and tried to turn his head toward the pit, but it was too late, the vomit was already running down the machine. "It's all the commandant's fault," cried the officer, and mindlessly shook the brass rods at the front. "My machine is being befouled like a stable." With trembling hands he showed the traveler what had happened. "Didn't I try for hours to make the commandant understand that no food should be given a day before the execution? But the new mild tendency is of a different opinion. The commandant's lady stuffed the man full of sweets before he is led away. His whole life he has fed on stinking fish and now he has to eat sweets. But that would be possible, I wouldn't object. But why don't they procure a new felt, as I have been requesting for 3 months? How can one take this felt into one's mouth without disgust? Felt that more than 100 men have sucked and bitten on in their death throes." The condemned man had laid his head down and looked peaceful. The soldier was busy cleaning the machine with the condemned man's shirt. The officer went to the traveler, who stepped back in some premonition, but the officer took him by the hand and drew him aside. "I wish to speak a few words with you in confidence," he said. "May I?" "Of course," said the traveler, and listened with lowered eyes. "This procedure and this execution, which you now have the opportunity to admire, has no longer any open supporter in our colony. I am its sole champion, just as I am the sole champion of the legacy of the former commandant. I can no longer think of any further development of the procedure. I expend all my strength to preserve what exists. When the former commandant lived, the colony was full of his supporters. I have some of the former commandant's power of persuasion, but I entirely lack his power. As a result, the supporters have gone into hiding. There are still many of them, but none admits it. If you go into the tea house today, that is, on an execution day, and listen around, you will perhaps hear only ambiguous remarks. Those are all supporters, but under the present commandant and his present views they are completely useless to me. And now I ask you, is such a life's work," he pointed to the machine, "to perish because of this commandant and the women influencing him? Is one to allow that? Even if one is only a stranger on our island for a few days? But there is no time to lose. Something is being prepared against my judiciary. Consultations are already taking place in the commandant's headquarters to which I am not admitted. Even your visit today seems to me characteristic of the whole situation. They are cowardly and send you, a stranger, ahead. How different the execution was in earlier times. Already a day before the execution, the whole valley was crowded with people. All came only to see. Early in the morning the commandant appeared with his ladies. Fanfares woke the entire camp. I reported that everything was prepared. The society, no high official might be absent, arranged itself around the machine. This pile of cane chairs is a pitiful remnant from that time. The machine gleamed freshly polished. For almost every execution I used new replacement parts. Before hundreds of eyes, all the spectators stood on tiptoe right up to the heights there. The condemned man was laid under the harrow by the commandant himself. What today a common soldier is allowed to do was then my task, as president of the court, and was an honor for me. And then the execution began. No discord disturbed the working of the machine. Many no longer watched at all, but lay in the sand with closed eyes. All knew, now justice is being done. In the silence one heard only the sighing of the condemned man, muffled by the felt. Today the machine no longer manages to press a stronger sigh from the condemned man than the felt can still stifle. But at that time the writing needles exuded a caustic liquid that is no longer permitted to be used today. Well, and then came the 6th hour. It was impossible to grant all those requesting to watch from close up. The commandant, in his insight, ordered that the children above all should be considered. I, of course, by virtue of my office, was always allowed to stand close by. Often I crouched there, with 2 small children in my arms, one to the right, one to the left. How we all absorbed the look of transfiguration from the martyred face, how we held our cheeks in the glow of this justice, finally attained and already fading. What times those were, my comrade! The officer had evidently forgotten who was standing before him. He had embraced the traveler and laid his head on his shoulder. The traveler was in great embarrassment, impatiently looked past the officer. The soldier had finished the cleaning and now poured rice pap from a tin into the basin. As soon as the condemned man, who seemed to have completely recovered, noticed this, he began to snap at the pap with his tongue. The soldier kept pushing him away, for the pap was probably intended for a later time, but it was certainly unseemly as well that the soldier reached in with his dirty hands and ate in front of the hungry condemned man. The officer quickly collected himself. "I did not want to move you," he said. "I know it is impossible to make those times comprehensible today. Besides, the machine still works and operates on its own. It operates on its own even if it stands alone in this valley. And at the end the body still falls in that incomprehensibly gentle glide into the pit, even if hundreds do not gather like flies around the pit as they did then. At that time we had to install a strong railing around the pit. It was torn away long ago." The traveler wanted to withdraw his face from the officer and looked aimlessly around. The officer thought he was surveying the desolate valley. He therefore seized his hands, turned around him to catch his gaze, and asked, "Do you notice the shame?" But the traveler remained silent. The officer left him alone for a little while. With legs apart, hands on hips, he stood still and looked at the ground. Then he smiled encouragingly at the traveler and said, "I was nearby yesterday when the commandant invited you. I heard the invitation. I know the commandant. I understood at once what he intended with the invitation. Although his power would be great enough to take action against me, he does not yet dare, but he certainly wants to expose me to your judgment, the judgment of a respected foreigner. His calculation is careful. You are on the island for the 2nd day. You did not know the former commandant and his way of thinking. You are conditioned by European views. Perhaps you are a fundamental opponent of capital punishment in general and of such a machine-administered kind in particular. Moreover, you see how the execution takes place without public participation, sadly, on a machine already somewhat damaged, would it not, taking all this together, so the commandant thinks, be very possible that you do not approve my procedure? And if you do not approve it, you will not keep silent about it. I am still speaking from the commandant's perspective, for you certainly trust your own much-tried convictions. You have, it is true, seen and learned to respect the peculiarities of many peoples. You will therefore probably not speak out with full force against the procedure, as you might perhaps do in your own country. But the commandant needs no such thing. A casual, a mere careless word is enough. It need not even correspond to your conviction, if only it apparently meets his wish. That he will question you with all cunning, I am certain. And his ladies will sit around in a circle and prick up their ears. You will say something like, "With us the judicial procedure is different," or "With us the accused is questioned before sentencing," or "With us the condemned man is informed of the sentence," or "With us there are punishments other than capital punishment," or "With us torture existed only in the Middle Ages." All these are remarks that are as correct as they seem self-evident to you, innocent remarks that do not impugn my procedure. But how will the commandant take them? I see him, our good commandant, at once pushing the chair aside and rushing out onto the balcony. I see his ladies streaming after him. I hear his voice. The ladies call it a voice of thunder. Well, and he speaks, a great Western scholar, appointed to examine judicial procedures in all countries, has just said that our procedure according to old custom is inhuman. After this judgment by such a personality, it is of course no longer possible for me to tolerate this procedure. Therefore from this day on my order, etc. you want to intervene. You did not say what he proclaims. You did not call my procedure inhuman. On the contrary, in accordance with your profound insight, you consider it most humane and most worthy of man. You also admire this machinery, but it is too late. You do not even get onto the balcony, which is already crowded with ladies. You want to make yourself noticed, you want to shout, but a lady's hand stops your mouth, and I and the work of the former commandant are lost. The traveler had to suppress a smile. So easy was the task he had thought so difficult. He said evasively, "You overestimate my influence. The commandant has read my letters of recommendation. He knows that I am no expert in judicial procedures. If I were to express an opinion, it would be the opinion of a private individual, no more significant than that of anyone else, and in any case far less significant than the opinion of the commandant, who, as I believe I understand, has very extensive rights in this penal colony. If his opinion on this procedure is as definite as you believe, then I fear the end of this procedure has come, without my modest assistance being required for it." Did the officer already understand? No, he did not yet understand. He shook his head vigorously, glanced briefly back at the condemned man and the soldier, who flinched and stopped eating the rice, came quite close to the traveler, looked not into his face but somewhere on his coat, and said more quietly than before, "You do not know the commandant. You stand toward him and toward us all in a certain, forgive the expression, innocent relation. Your influence, believe me, cannot be overestimated. I was actually overjoyed when I heard that you were to attend the execution alone. This order of the commandant's was meant to strike at me, but now I turn it to my advantage." Undistracted by false whispers and contemptuous glances, which could not have been avoided with greater participation in the execution, you have listened to my explanations, seen the machine, and are now about to witness the execution. Your verdict is certainly already settled. If there are still small uncertainties, the sight of the execution will remove them. And now I make this request of you, help me against the commandant." The traveler would not let him continue. "How could I do that?" he exclaimed. "It is quite impossible. I can be as little use to you as I can harm you." "You can," said the officer. With some apprehension, the traveler saw the officer clenching his fists. "You can," repeated the officer even more urgently. "I have a plan that must succeed. You believe your influence is not sufficient. I know that it is sufficient. But granted that you are right, is it not necessary, in order to preserve this procedure, to try even what may be insufficient? Therefore listen to my plan. For its execution it is above all necessary that today in the colony you hold back as much as possible with your verdict on the procedure. Unless you are directly asked, you must not express yourself in any way, but your remarks must be brief and vague. People should notice that it is difficult for you to speak about it, that you are embittered, that, if you were to speak openly, you would have to burst out in curses. I do not demand that you lie, by no means. You should only answer briefly, for instance, yes, I have seen the execution, or yes, I have heard all the explanations. Just that, nothing more. For the bitterness people are to notice in you there is sufficient cause, even if not in the commandant's sense. He, of course, will completely misunderstand it and interpret it in his sense. My plan is based on that. Tomorrow in the commandant's headquarters a large session of all the higher administrative officials takes place under the chairmanship of the commandant. The commandant has of course managed to turn such sessions into public spectacles. A gallery has been built that is always filled with spectators. I am compelled to take part in the deliberations, but disgust makes me shudder. You will certainly be invited to the session in any case. If you behave today according to my plan, the invitation will become an urgent request. But if for some incomprehensible reason you are not invited after all, you would of course have to demand the invitation. That you will then receive it is certain. So tomorrow you sit with the ladies in the commandant's box. He assures himself frequently by looking upward that you are there. After various indifferent, ridiculous agenda items calculated only for the spectators, mostly harbor constructions, always only harbor constructions, the judicial procedure also comes up for discussion. If it is not raised, or not soon enough, by the commandant, I will see to it that it is. I will stand up and report the execution that has taken place today. Quite briefly, only this report. Such a report is not customary there, but I will do it anyway. The commandant thanks me, as always, with a friendly smile, and now he cannot restrain himself, he seizes the good opportunity. The report, he will say, more or less, of the execution that has taken place has just been made. I would only like to add to this report that this particular execution was attended by the great scholar whose visit of such extraordinary honor to our colony you all know. Our session today too has been enhanced in importance by his presence. Should we not now address to this great scholar the question of how he judges the execution according to old custom and the procedure preceding it? Of course applause everywhere, universal agreement, I am the loudest. The commandant bows to you and says, then in the name of all I put the question. And now you step to the railing. Lay your hands forward for all to see, otherwise the ladies will seize them and play with your fingers. And now finally your words come. I do not know how I will endure the tension of the hours until then. In your speech you must set yourself no limits, make a noise with the truth, lean over the railing, roar, yes, roar, your opinion, your unshakable opinion, at the commandant. But perhaps you do not want to do that, it does not suit your character, in your country people behave differently in such situations, that is also right, that also suffices completely, do not stand up at all, say only a few words, whisper them so that they are just audible to the officials below you, that suffices, you need not even speak yourself of the lack of participation in the execution, of the creaking wheel, the torn strap, the disgusting felt, no, I will take over all the rest, and believe me, if my speech does not chase him out of the hall, it will force him to his knees to make him confess, old commandant, before you I bow. That is my plan, will you help me carry it out? But of course you will, more than that, you must. And the officer seized the traveler by both arms and looked, breathing heavily, into his face. He had shouted the last sentences so loudly that even the soldier and the condemned man became attentive. Although they could not understand anything, they nevertheless paused in their eating and looked over at the traveler while chewing. The answer he had to give was clear to the traveler from the beginning. He had experienced too much in his life to be able to waver here. He was basically honest and had no fear. Yet now, at the sight of the soldier and the condemned man, he hesitated for one breath. But finally he said, as he had to, "No." The officer blinked several times with his eyes, but did not let his gaze leave him. "Would you like an explanation?" asked the traveler. The officer nodded silently. "I am an opponent of this procedure," the traveler now said, "even before you took me into your confidence, which I shall naturally under no circumstances abuse. I had already considered whether I would be entitled to intervene against this procedure and whether my intervention could have even a slight chance of success. To whom I should turn first in doing so was clear to me, to the commandant, of course. You have made that even clearer to me, without, however, strengthening my resolution. On the contrary, your honest conviction touches me, even if it cannot sway me." The officer remained silent, turned to the machine, grasped one of the brass rods, and looked up at the designer, leaning back a little, as if checking whether everything was in order. The soldier and the condemned man seemed to have become friends with each other. The condemned man, as difficult as this was to carry out with the firm strapping, made signs to the soldier. The latter bent down to him. The condemned man whispered something to him, and the soldier nodded. The traveler followed the officer and said, "You do not yet know what I intend to do. I will indeed tell the commandant my opinion on the procedure, but not in a session, rather privately, nor will I stay here long enough to be able to be drawn into any session. I am leaving early tomorrow morning, or at least embarking." It did not look as if the officer had been listening. "So the procedure has not convinced you," he said to himself, and smiled the way an old man smiles at a child's nonsense, keeping his own real thoughts behind the smile. "Then it is time," he said finally, and suddenly looked at the traveler with bright eyes that contained some challenge, some call for participation. "Time for what?" asked the traveler uneasily, but received no answer. "You are free," said the officer to the condemned man in the latter's language. At first the man did not believe it. "Now, you are free," said the officer. For the first time the condemned man's face showed real life. Was it true? Was it only a caprice of the officers that might pass? Had the foreign traveler obtained pardon for him? What was it? So his face seemed to ask. But not for long. Whatever it might be, if he was permitted, he wanted to be really free, and he began to struggle as far as the harrow allowed. "You are tearing my straps," cried the officer. "Be still. We will unfasten them." And, giving a sign to the soldier, he set to work with him. The condemned man laughed wordlessly to himself, turning his face left to the officer, right to the soldier, and not forgetting the traveler either. "Pull him out," the officer ordered the soldier. Because of the harrow, a certain amount of care had to be exercised. The condemned man already had some small lacerations on his back from his impatience. From now on, however, the officer scarcely bothered with him anymore. He went to the traveler, drew out the small leather folder again, leafed through it, finally found the sheet he was looking for, and showed it to the traveler. "Read it," he said. "I cannot," said the traveler. "I have already said I cannot read these sheets." "But look closely at the sheet," said the officer, and stepped beside the traveler to read with him. When that helped nothing either, he traced with his little finger high above the paper, as if the sheet must on no account be touched, in order to assist the traveler in reading that way. The traveler also made an effort, in order at least to be obliging to the officer in this, but it was impossible for him. Now the officer began to spell out the inscription and then read it once more in context. "Be just, it says," he said, "now you can read it." The traveler bent so deeply over the paper that the officer, fearing a touch, moved it farther away. The traveler now said nothing more, but it was clear that he still had not been able to read it. "Be just, it says," the officer said once more. "Perhaps," said the traveler, "I believe it stands there." "Good," said the officer, at least partially satisfied, and climbed the ladder with the sheet. With great care he bedded the sheet in the designer and seemed to rearrange the gearwork entirely. It was very laborious work. It must have involved very small wheels too. Sometimes the officer's head disappeared completely in the designer, so precisely did he have to examine the gearwork. The traveler followed this work continuously from below. His neck grew stiff, and his eyes ached from the sky flooded with sunlight. The soldier and the condemned man were occupied only with each other. The condemned man's shirt and trousers, which were already lying in the pit, were fished out by the soldier with the tip of his bayonet. The shirt was horribly dirty, and the condemned man washed it in the water bucket. When he then put on the shirt and trousers, both the soldier and the condemned man had to laugh loudly, for the garments were after all cut open at the back. Perhaps the condemned man felt obliged to entertain the soldier. He turned around in the slashed clothing in a circle before the soldier, who squatted on the ground slapping his knees with laughter. Yet they still restrained themselves out of regard for the gentlemen present. When the officer had finally finished up above, he surveyed the whole once more with a smile in all its parts, closed the lid of the designer, which had been open until now, climbed down, looked into the pit and then at the condemned man, noted with satisfaction that the latter had taken out his clothing, then went to the water bucket to wash his hands, recognized too late the disgusting filth, was sad that he could not now wash his hands, finally thrust them into the sand. This substitute did not satisfy him, but he had to make do, then stood up and began to unbutton his uniform coat. As he did so, the two ladies' handkerchiefs he had thrust under his collar first fell into his hands. "Here are your handkerchiefs," he said, and threw them to the condemned man. And to the traveler he said by way of explanation, "Gifts from the ladies." In spite of the obvious haste with which he now removed the uniform coat and then undressed completely, he nevertheless handled each garment very carefully, even running his fingers specially over the silver braids on his tunic and shaking one tassel into place. Little in accord with this care, however, was the fact that, as soon as he was finished handling a piece, he immediately threw it with an irritable jerk into the pit. The last thing left to him was his short sword with the sword belt. He drew the sword from the scabbard, broke it, then gathered everything together, the sword pieces, the scabbard, and the belt, and threw it away so violently that it clanged against one another down in the pit. Now he stood naked there. The traveler bit his lip and said nothing. For he knew, to be sure, what would happen, but he had no right to hinder the officer in anything. If the judicial procedure to which the officer clung was really so close to being abolished, possibly as a result of the traveler's intervention, to which he for his part felt obliged, then the officer was now acting completely correctly. In his place the traveler would not have acted otherwise. The soldier and the condemned man understood nothing at first. At first they did not even look. The condemned man was very pleased at getting the handkerchiefs back, but he was not allowed to enjoy them long, for the soldier snatched them from him with a quick, unpredictable grab. Now the condemned man in turn tried to pull the handkerchiefs out from behind the soldier's belt, where he had hidden them, but the soldier was alert. So they squabbled in half jest. Only when the officer was completely naked did they become attentive. Especially the condemned man seemed struck by the premonition of some great reversal. What had happened to him was now happening to the officer. Perhaps it would go right to the extreme. Probably the foreign traveler had given the order for it. So this was revenge. Without having suffered to the end himself, he was nevertheless avenged to the end. A broad, silent laugh now appeared on his face and did not go away again. The officer, however, had turned to the machine. If it had already been clear earlier that he understood the machine well, one might now almost be startled at how he handled it and how it obeyed. He had only brought his hand near the harrow and it raised and lowered itself several times until it reached the right position to receive him. He touched only the edge of the bed and it already began to quiver. The felt stump came to meet his mouth. One could see how the officer actually did not want it, but the hesitation lasted only a moment. At once he submitted and took it in. Everything was ready, only the straps still hung down at the sides, but they were clearly unnecessary. The officer did not need to be strapped down. Then the condemned man noticed the loose straps. In his opinion, the execution was not perfect if the straps were not buckled. He waved eagerly to the soldier, and they ran over to strap the officer down. The latter had already stretched out one foot to push the crank that was to set the designer in motion. Then he saw that the two had come. He therefore withdrew his foot and let himself be strapped down. Now, to be sure, he could no longer reach the crank. Neither the soldier nor the condemned man would find it, and the traveler was resolved not to stir. It was not necessary. Scarcely were the straps applied when the machine already began to work. The bed quivered, the needles danced on the skin, the harrow floated up and down. The traveler had already been staring for some time before he remembered that a wheel in the designer was supposed to screech. But everything was quiet, not even the slightest humming could be heard. By this quiet work the machine quite slipped from attention. The traveler looked over at the soldier and the condemned man. The condemned man was the livelier of the two. Everything about the machine interested him. Now he bent down, now he stretched up. All the while he had his forefinger extended to show the soldier something. The traveler found it painful. He was resolved to remain here until the end, but he could not have long endured the sight of the two. "Go home," he said. The soldier might have been willing to do so, but the condemned man took the order almost as a punishment. With folded hands he begged to be allowed to stay, and when the traveler shook his head and would not yield, he even knelt down. Seeing that orders were no help here, the traveler was about to go over and drive the two away. Then he heard a noise up in the designer. He looked up. Was that one gear still causing trouble? But it was something else. Slowly the lid of the designer raised and then snapped fully open. The teeth of a gear appeared and rose up. Soon the whole wheel was visible. It was as if some great force were compressing the designer so that no room remained for this wheel. The wheel turned right to the edge of the designer, fell down, rolled upright a little way in the sand, and then lay still. But already another was rising up above, followed by many others, large, small, and scarcely distinguishable. The same thing happened with all of them. At every moment one thought the designer must certainly now be emptied, when a new, particularly numerous group appeared, rose up, fell down, rolled in the sand, and lay still. Over this process the condemned man completely forgot the traveler's order. The gear wheels delighted him utterly. He kept wanting to catch one, and at the same time urged the soldier to help, but drew his hand back in alarm, for immediately another wheel followed that startled him, at least in its first rolling. The traveler, on the other hand, was very disturbed. The machine was obviously going to pieces. Its quiet operation had been an illusion. He had the feeling that he must now look after the officer, since the latter could no longer look after himself. But while the falling of the gear wheels claimed his entire attention, he had neglected to watch the rest of the machine. However, when now, after the last gear wheel had left the designer, he bent over the harrow, he had a new, even more unpleasant surprise. The harrow was not riding, it was only stabbing, and the bed was not turning the body over but only lifting it, quivering, into the needles. The traveler wanted to intervene, possibly stop the whole thing. This was no torture such as the officer wished to achieve, this was immediate murder. He stretched out his hands. But at that moment the harrow already rose to the side with the impaled body, as it otherwise did only in the 12th hour. The blood flowed in 100 streams, not mixed with water. The little water jets had failed this time too. And now the last thing failed as well. The body did not detach from the long needles. It poured out its blood but hung over the pit without falling. The harrow wanted to return to its old position, but as if it itself noticed that it was not yet freed of its burden, it remained hovering over the pit. "Help!" cried the traveler to the soldier and the condemned man, and himself seized the officer's feet. He wanted to push against the feet here. The two were to seize the officer's head from the other side, and thus he was to be slowly lifted off the needles. But now the two could not make up their minds to come. The condemned man actually turned away. The traveler had to go over to them and force them to the officer's head. At this he saw, almost against his will, the face of the corpse. It was as it had been in life. No sign of the promised redemption could be discovered. What all the others had found in the machine, the officer had not found. The lips were firmly pressed together, the eyes were open, had the expression of life. The gaze was calm and convinced. The tip of the great iron spike went through the forehead. As the traveler, with the soldier and the condemned man behind him, reached the first houses of the colony, the soldier pointed to one and said, "Here is the tea house." On the ground floor of a house was a deep, low, cavern-like room, smoky on walls and ceiling. Toward the street it was open in its full width. Although the tea house differed little from the rest of the houses of the colony, which were all very dilapidated except for the commandant's palatial buildings, it nevertheless exerted on the traveler the impression of a historic memory, and he felt the power of earlier times. He stepped closer, walked, followed by his companions, between the unoccupied tables that stood in the street in front of the tea house, and breathed the cool, musty air that came from inside. "The old man is buried here," said the soldier. A place in the cemetery was denied him by the chaplain. For a time people were undecided where to bury him. Finally they buried him here. Of that the officer certainly told you nothing, for of that he was naturally most ashamed. He even tried several times at night to dig the old man up, but he was always driven away. "Where is the grave?" asked the traveler, who could not believe the soldier. At once both of them, the soldier as well as the condemned man, ran ahead of him and pointed with outstretched hands to the place where the grave was supposed to be. They led the traveler right up to the back wall, where guests were sitting at a few tables. They were probably dock workers, strong men with short, gleaming, full black beards. All were coatless, their shirts were torn, they were poor, humbled people. As the traveler approached, some stood up, pressed themselves against the wall, and looked at him. "A foreigner," it was whispered around the traveler, "he wants to see the grave." They pushed one of the tables aside, under which there was in fact a gravestone. It was a simple stone, low enough to remain hidden under a table. It bore an inscription in very small letters. To read it the traveler had to kneel down. It read, "Here rests the old commandant." His followers, who now must not bear a name, dug the grave for him and set the stone. There exists a prophecy that after a certain number of years the commandant will rise again and from this house lead his followers to reconquer the colony. Believe and wait. When the traveler had read this and stood up, he saw the men standing around him and smiling, as if they had read the inscription with him, found it ridiculous, and were inviting him to share their opinion. The traveler acted as if he had not noticed it, distributed some coins among them, waited until the table was pushed back over the grave, left the tea house, and went to the harbor. The soldier and the condemned man had found acquaintances in the tea house who detained them. But they must soon have torn themselves away, for the traveler was only halfway down the long staircase leading to the boats when they were already running after him. They probably wanted to force the traveler at the last moment to take them along. While the traveler below was negotiating with a ferryman about the passage to the steamer, the two raced down the stairs, silently, for they did not dare to shout. But when they arrived below, the traveler was already in the boat, and the ferryman was just casting off from the shore. They could still have leapt into the boat, but the traveler lifted a heavy knotted rope from the floor, threatened them with it, and thus kept them from leaping.